As a young, inexperienced composer, I sat down in my first composition lesson and asked a man who had studied composition with Giancarlo Menotti and counterpoint with Scalero and had many conversations with Samuel Barber about composition. And I asked him, should I end the piece in the same key that I started, and how do I go about accomplishing that? He paused, looked over at me, probably reconsidered his decision to take me on as a private student, and in his very candid way, he said, "Why the hell would anyone care about that?" And it was at that moment that I realized not only do I not have all the answers, I don't even have most of the questions right. Fast forward over a decade later, and now a lot of people ask me similar things. How do I know when to change keys, when to modulate? How do I do that? How do I pick a time signature for my piece? How do I know which instruments to use? These are all really valid questions. And I think the real issue stems from us getting so caught up on the details that I guess we can't see the forest for the trees in a lot of cases. And before we get to those details and how to actually go about the tactical approach to actually doing it, we need to ask ourselves some important questions first, like what is the whole point of this piece? What do I want it to convey emotionally to the listener? How do I want it to make them feel? But these questions seem abstract, so we just avoid them altogether, even though they influence all of the decisions that we have to make later. And those decisions are the details that we get so caught up in. And composition is just a matter of making a bunch of decisions, a bunch of small decisions that hopefully fit the broader picture of what we're trying to accomplish. But for me, when I was starting out, it all seemed still a bit magical, so I didn't really understand that it's just a set of processes that we go through, a series of decisions that we have to make. So today, I want to talk about how we can go from these incredibly important, broad questions that seem abstract and translate those into more specific things that we can actually do, specific musical things. So this is not a music theory video per se, because theory and composition are not the same process. Theory is more analytical, composition more creative, even though we do use some music theory in our composing. But most YouTube videos that I see jump straight to the theory because it's much easier just to name things than to really get to the root of the issue. It feels a bit more black and white, a bit more formulaic, and we like things that are easy to digest, even if they sound super complicated. It's something we can memorize. Every great piece has a model. When my teacher told me this, I had probably the same reaction that you're having right now, and we'll leave in the comments section. But I want to make something original and innovative, and I don't want to just copy other people. And he wasn't really talking about copying. The more experience I've gained, the more I recognize the benefit of standing on the shoulders of the masters who have already figured out a lot of the stuff that just works. Then I can take my favorite components of the things they've already figured out and use that as a foundation to experiment on top of. Take a piece of music that you love. Take a song, take a track, take a classical piece, and figure out why it works. Why does it move you emotionally? And then how have they accomplished that? Why did the composer decide to repeat this section here instead of there? Why did they delay the repeat and go through this sort of developmental phase where they're experimenting with motifs that are based on the original melody, but using tension to build so that when it comes back, it's even more impactful? What does that have in common with some of your other favorite works, and how is it different? What are some areas that this composer pushed the boundaries that this one did not? Those were all intentional choices that they made. Why? We can sketch out the basic form of a piece in a more helpful way for us as composers than just analyzing every chord name in a way similar to this. Once you understand the framework on which that piece is built, you can sort of strip it down, take that framework, and decorate it with your own material. This is an incredibly effective reverse engineering technique. As you gain more experience, you can start to expand in different ways and can start to maybe reshape things in your own taste, in your own voice. If you'd like another really clear illustrated example of this technique stripped down to its barest, rawest form, you can download the free PDF ebook that I have in the description below, and it'll take you through some of my favorite compositional concepts that have been the most beneficial to me over the years, including this very technique. Beethoven was known as a great inventor, but he still used sonata form. He still used a lot of the forms from the classical period that he was just coming out of. But in his later sonatas, he started to really blur the form and combine it with other forms. Like I played Opus 101 in my master's recital, and in the last movement, there's just a fugue in the middle of the development. I think he just did it to torture me, actually. Sonatas already existed, fugues already existed, and Beethoven found unique ways of combining those things. Now, none of us are Beethoven, but we can still apply this concept to our own work, even if we're not using traditional classical forms. I am a huge fan of French composers like Ravel and Fauré and Poulenc, because it seems like everything that they do is filled with intention. There's a real less is more ethos to the way that they write, in a way that you don't really find with other composers like, Wagner or Reger. That would be the more is not enough school of composition. I'm pretty sure I've made this analogy before, but it kind of reminds me of the difference between Michael Phelps jumping into a pool and swimming across it, and me jumping into the same pool and swimming across it. We're both going to get to the other side eventually, but one is going to be incredibly efficient. One has eliminated all of the wasted motion from his movements so that only what is necessary still exists. And the other is going to expel more water from the pool than a Mississippi water park on a July afternoon. And if you don't know what that means, I can't help you. If you focus on doing less, you have to make those few ideas really strong. And that's a skill in and of itself. You have to be efficient with them. But if you do that, you find that your ideas suddenly have a lot more mileage in them, or at least I have found that. It always gives me a feeling of having a strong foundation when I have just a couple of really strong ideas and then just figure out ways to write variations on them or vary the stuff that happens around them or in between them. They also kind of beg to be repeated, like a really strong theme or a really strong melody begs to be repeated. So the listener not only doesn't mind hearing it again, they really want to hear it again. And that's a really powerful element of music, is hearing something that you remember come back later in a piece, and then you realize that the composer has crafted it in such a way that you're relieved and you really want to hear that again. We can take this example from a couple videos ago where I did a weird improvisation with an AI prompt, which was a weird experience to say the least. But even though it was an improvisation, I sort of intuitively, because I've been doing this for a minute, I sort of knew that if I developed some strong motifs to keep coming back to, some little snippets of ideas, and then a theme that I could improvise on, that I could come back to, and the listener would want to hear it repeated. That would anchor and kind of glue this whole improvisation together, even if I threw in some stuff, tried some stuff that didn't work, which, by the way, I definitely did try some stuff that didn't work, but because I kept coming back to the same recognizable, strong, highly memorable material, it all kind of worked, even if not quite as precisely as a written out composition would. As that young kid who walked into that first composition lesson, I was still very much of the mindset that I wanted to master every style. I wanted to write major symphonies. I wanted to write small, intimate piano pieces. I wanted to write virtuosic piano concertos. I was a pianist, so that kind of made sense. As I got a little older, I realized that's not necessarily possible. Like, you can't do everything in the course of a life, even though when you're 18, it certainly feels like you can. It's also really not ideal to do everything if your goal is to stand out from the crowd a little bit and develop some sort of voice of your own. It's really great to stay versatile and to continue learning and incorporating new things into your music as you learn them. I'm leaving that in. But I've actually found the most joy in taking the time to figure out what I actually want to focus on and what speaks to me emotionally the most, and then going really deep on those things rather than feeling so spread out across the surface of a lot of different styles or genres. It also keeps my music a little bit more focused, I guess, a little bit more rooted, so that everything kind of comes through as being a reflection of my taste. And I feel like even though I write dark electronic ambient music sometimes I write an intimate piano waltz, I still feel like, because it comes from my ethos, the concepts that I like to employ the most, I feel like, I hope, that it all kind of sounds like it's coming from me. I'm using my taste, which I've developed over a couple of decades of experimenting. A nice side benefit is if you take this approach, people start to come to you if you really hone and develop your craft. And so rather than bending over backwards for every director that I wanted to work with and trying to figure out and guess what they wanted from me, sometimes directors or collaborators will come to me and be like, hey, I like what you do. Can we work together on something that is going to naturally fit what you do really well? And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I can't stress this one enough. This may be the most important takeaway from today's video. And I'm sorry, because it's not a quick, easy tip that the pros don't want you to know about. Pick an instrument and become proficient at it. I didn't say you had to become a virtuoso, but you do need to know your way around an instrument. And I'm not talking about your laptop. Sure, you can use your laptop like an instrument. I get it. But knowing how to play a keyboard instrument is incredibly valuable. I am biased, of course, but I think it's one of the best ways to visualize harmony, to visualize basic theory concepts. And it also lends itself to sort of linear writing and linear thinking, rather than just always thinking about stacked vertical chords like we talk about, which pop music and rock music does a lot. My proficiency at the keyboard has been the single most important asset to me as a composer, bar none. Study simple pieces by great composers. A great example are the children's pieces by Prokofiev. Just simple little piano pieces, but you really see that composer's ideology and the techniques that they use stripped down in an easily digestible way. They're still incredibly deep pieces. There's a lot there, but you can see everything. Sometimes when we listen to big orchestral works or big electronic productions, we get lost in the sound, and it's hard to identify what does and doesn't work musically. Once you've studied some simple pieces, some children's pieces that still are well crafted, you can take those ideas and start to expand upon them as you become more comfortable with orchestration and production and all of that stuff. And then you're building from a really solid foundation. But if you're anything like me, you kind of want to jump to your grand opus symphony before you even really understand how to write for your own instrument. So just walk before you run, and then when it comes time to run the marathon, you're going to find yourself in a lot better shape and you'll be ready to take that next step.